The final release of Gran Turismo Sport is almost upon us, but for now we have this closed beta test to see how the game's shaping up. And I guess the question everyone wants to know is this: does it represent a generational leap over Gran Turismo 6? After all, there is some debate about this online, with some comments suggesting that perhaps the visual feature set hasn't really moved forward that much, and that the game is quite PlayStation 3-like in certain ways. So, is that the case? Hey guys, this is Dave here, and that's the question I'll be answering. Is Gran Turismo Sport generational leap over Gran Turismo 6? Well, to cut right to the chase, yes it is. And despite the look of the game initially appearing quite sterile at points, it's worth bearing in mind that Polyphony Digital are targeting realism, and real life doesn't always look eye-poppingly stunning. It's all about creating the most realistic representation of the cars, the materials, trackside detail, lighting. That's kind of the aim here. Gran Turismo Sport features perhaps the biggest shake-up in graphical quality that we've seen in a Gran Turismo game since the series made the transition from PlayStation 2 to PS3. We've got modern day rendering techniques here, such as physically based elements for lighting and shaders, along with a lot more, all the usual upgrades you'd expect, from texture quality to the sheer level of detail on offer. It is definitely a considerable leap over Gran Turismo 6, so let's take a look and see what's changed. In terms of the basics, image quality gets a boost. GT6 somewhat took a step back in that regard. Here we're analysing that particular game in the 1080p mode, where the frame buffer comes in at 1440 by 1080 and uses MLAA as the anti-aliasing solution, which doesn't do that great a job. There's quite a lot of jaggies and shimmering on show, and there's also a lot of dithering around foliage due to the use of Alpha 2 coverage, which renders these elements in kind of a half resolution interlaced format of sorts. Whereas in GT Sport we're looking at a full 1920 by 1080 resolution with much better use of post-process anti-aliasing. Image quality is not only sharper but a lot cleaner, and while things aren't quite perfect, particularly across long clean edges, the game looks a lot more striking. The softness that was present on PlayStation 3 is now mostly gone, and we get a game that definitely is more striking as a result. You'll also note that the foliage is also rendered at full resolution here. The trees, grass and fences no longer exhibit the dithering, interlaced style artifacts we saw in Gran Turismo 6 and to a lesser extent Gran Turismo 5 as well. So overall image quality is much improved. Of course that's just the basics. There's a lot more going on here, and it's really obvious to see when comparing these two side by side. In fact, even when playing one version, then immediately switching back to the other, the difference is huge. It's eye-opening. Perhaps the most obvious upgrade here comes with the way the lighting and materials work. The lighting model has been completely redone. We not only get a greater amount of light sources, but coverage is a lot better across the scene, with more shadows being cast too. And the way these elements actually react to the environment themselves is also a considerable upgrade. Physically based rendering is fully in place across environment and vehicles, and this allows for more realistic interaction with light sources. So various surfaces and materials take on different characteristics under varying conditions. So the amount of specular, diffuse, roughness, reflectivity and colour saturation all change depending on the time of day, whether the cars or environment are in the shade, that kind of thing. Just look at the tarmac here. Notice how on PlayStation 3 tends to have more of a plain, shinier appearance, whereas on PS4 it's a lot more balanced, a lot more realistic. And this can be seen across the entire environment, whether you're looking at the tarmac itself, the surrounding buildings, or even things such as the trees and foliage. Everything takes on a more organic, realistic look, rather than a kind of shiny video game style appearance, and that is a huge upgrade. This technology is used intricately across the cars as well. In terms of the car headlights, Polyphony Digital actually measures the real-life brightness of these and then inputs that data in the game, simulating how that would look in real life, the amount of glow and radius of those light sources. The paint structure on the bodywork is also analysed using samples of real body paint to get the right hues, colour and saturation. And this helps to create the material properties which allow them to look realistic under various lighting conditions. If we switch to the cockpit view, Polyphony Digital use a similar technique in order to recreate accurate materials for things such as the material on the seats, the rubber on the steering wheel, and various other aspects such as plastic and carbon fibers. Some of the upgrades are quite subtle in nature, others are more striking. But there's definitely a difference when going from Gran Turismo 6 to GT Sport here. The use of high dynamic range also has benefits even when playing in SDR, particularly with regards to the entire lighting model. For example, the HDR grading allows for greater detail in peak highlights along with more detail in dark shaded areas, and the entire dynamic range is considerably improved, giving the game more pop, more three-dimensionality. It's impressive stuff and one of the biggest upgrades we've seen when going from GT6 to GT Sport. The tracks themselves are also completely remodeled in GT Sport as well, with more update placement of buildings, vehicles and other scenery. So for example, in some places we get additional cars, additional buildings and spectators, fleshing out these areas of the track, adding more detail to parts of the course which previously appeared a little bit empty, I guess. And this definitely adds more density and detail to the overall presentation. Meanwhile, in other areas, objects are removed or shuffled about. So here the cars, vans and tents on the left are completely removed in GT Sport, perhaps recreating how the track looks in a more up-to-date manner. Whereas in other areas of the track there is more detail, such as extra billboards being put up. Overall, while things have been shuffled about, generally speaking the level of detail is considerably better. Geometry complexity is increased, so elements such as fences, buildings and spectator stands feature more intricate details. There's more three-dimensional spectators on screen as well, and on top of that there's just a lot more objects dotted about the environment. Things such as foliage density and detail is considerably increased, with more in terms of grasses and plants scattered across the track, which also fleshes out the presentation further. It's something that was definitely lacking in GT6, but with the additional power of PS4, GT Sport can include a lot more lifelike elements, and for the most part the game does look great with these changes, although not all aspects of the game are quite as refined. Shadow quality still looks a little rough, and you can clearly see the shadow cascades transitioning when driving across the track. It's something that could be perhaps upgraded on PlayStation 4 Pro in the future, but for now I guess it is one of those compromises that we're still likely to see in a current generational game. There are also some flat lower resolution textures dotted around, particularly across distant scenery. It's not especially common, but there's still a sense that the artwork lacks consistency in certain areas, even though it is still a massive improvement over the PlayStation 3 and indeed PS2 installments. Performance is another area where Gran Turismo Sport sees improvement. For example, in GT6, the game managed to maintain a mostly solid 60 FPS in the 720p mode, but when switching to 1080p, 60 FPS, well, the results were pretty variable and the game often failed to hit that target. Take a look here and you'll note there's plenty of frame rate drops and consistent screen tearing. The game uses an adaptive VSync, but as the rendering load is too much to maintain a solid 60 FPS, that means tearing is commonplace. It's not a great experience, and GT6 is better played in the 720p mode. In comparison though, Gran Turismo Sport fares a lot better, and the game actually manages to hit 60 FPS pretty solidly in less demanding areas when there's only a couple of cars on the track. That said, at the beginning of the race, when right at the starting grid, performance is impacted more heavily, down to the low 50s, high 40s. So we don't get a complete 60 FPS lock, at least with base hardware. Thankfully though, there's none of the tearing that we saw in an earlier trailer, so the developers appear to have made some optimizations since then, and as a result the experience at 1080p is definitely a class above that of Gran Turismo 6. So from a visual perspective, there's a lot more going on, and Gran Turismo Sport definitely represents a massive generational leap over GT6. But it's not just graphical quality that's been given a boost. Sound design is also overhauled too. One of the main complaints with Gran Turismo 6 was the somewhat mixed sound design, especially where the car engines were concerned. They often sounded muffled or could get drowned out by the noise of screeching tyres on tarmac. Essentially, other games like Forza Motorsport Drive Club, the sound design there had moved on and Gran Turismo had failed to catch up. Thankfully, with Gran Turismo Sport, there is a definite improvement there. Engines sound crisper and clearer, and dynamics also change when switching between the different viewpoints. Here's a comparison with the external car viewpoint. First up, here's Gran Turismo 6. And this is Gran Turismo Sport. Notice the difference? There's more clarity and crispness in the way the engines sound, and this is applied across a variety of sound effects in the game. There's a lot more intricacy with the general sound design. Gran Turismo Sport then definitely represents a generational leap over the PlayStation 3 installments. Graphical quality in all areas from lighting to effects work is considerably upgraded, to the point where we're looking at a completely new game from that perspective. And when you compare it with the kind of upgrades found with high dynamic range, the extra detail, saturation, and kind of punch to the image that provides, you're getting a much bigger leap than you'd initially expect. It's a promising start so far, although we have reservations with some aspects of the title. For example, the netcode could be a lot better. We've seen teleporting cars and, well, competitive play is what this title is being built for, and right now the online play doesn't quite shape up. But for now, the beta gives us an interesting look at the next generation Gran Turismo, and so far it is proving to be a generational leap in more than one aspect. And we look forward to seeing how well the final game holds up. Anyway, I think that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, and if you did, don't forget to like or subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.